Chapter 2, Dallas with Hindsight. Are Facts Important? When the Warren Commission presented its 888-page report to President Johnson on September 24, 1964, most Americans heaved a huge collective sigh of relief. For 10 months, a panel of 7 distinguished citizens, headed by Chief Justice Earl Warren, had studied the most shocking crime within living memory, and now its verdict was in. After viewing 3,154 exhibits and studying the testimony of 552 witnesses culled from some 26,550 interviews by the FBI and Secret Service, the Commission had found that the shots which killed President Kennedy and wounded Governor Connally were fired by Lee Harvey Oswald. It had concluded that Oswald also killed Dallas policeman J.D. Tippit, but it had found no evidence that either Lee Harvey Oswald or Jack Ruby was part of any conspiracy, domestic or foreign, to assassinate President Kennedy. These findings, to be sure, were expected, still, to a nation that had been exposed for nearly a year to rumors that Oswald was framed, that Oswald and Ruby were mere pawns in a vast conspiracy. The calm and reasoned Warren Commission report was a comforting volume. It was reassuring to be told by that respected and impartial panel that President Kennedy's mindless murder was the work of an unbalanced misfit rather than a squad of hired killers. The country might be sick, and not just from grief, but at least it had not spawned a whole apparatus of plotters, left-wing or right-wing, audacious enough to murder a president. Confidence in the findings of the Commission was bolstered 2 months later with the publication of its hearings, the 26 volumes of testimony and exhibits on which it based its conclusions. In those 54 pounds of blue-bound books, there was ample evidence not only of Oswald's guilt, but of the fact that the Commission had not merely tried him in absentia. Functioning as a fact-finding body rather than a court of law, a distinction that worked to its advantage, but which its critics refused to acknowledge, it explored more theories, tracked down more leads, and listened to more rambling witnesses, expert and illiterate, than any body of its kind in history. It interrogated stripteasers and senators, street urchins and psychiatrists. It listened patiently while Ravilo P. Oliver of the John Birch Society expounded his theory of the assassination. President Kennedy was killed by fellow communists because he was turning American. It dealt gently with an attorney named Mark Lane, the only witness who insisted on testifying in public session, when he told the Commission of a purported meeting 8 days before the assassination between Jack Ruby and Officer J.D. Tippit, then refused to reveal the source of his information. "You have done nothing but handicap us," said the Chief Justice of the United States. Carrying his own stopwatch, the Chief Justice jogged down the back stairs of the Texas School Book Depository to determine whether the assassin could get from his sniper's nest to that second-floor Coke machine where Oswald was first seen by police after the shooting in 1 minute and 14 seconds. He could. With the submission of its 296,000-word report, the Commission was hailed both at home and overseas for what the New York Times called a comprehensive and convincing account of the circumstances of President Kennedy's assassination. The Times added, "Readers of the full report will find no basis for questioning the Commission's conclusions that President Kennedy was killed by Lee Harvey Oswald, acting alone." Life magazine said, "The major significance of the report is that it lays to rest the lurid rumors and wild speculations that had spread after the assassination. It also confirms the basic facts, that Lee Harvey Oswald did it alone." The London Times called it thorough, painstaking, voluminous, frank, and above all else, scrupulously careful in its analysis and conclusions. The Manchester Guardian expressed belief that only the most skeptical will continue to harbor doubts about the assassination in the face of this massive report. the event remains a ghastly tragedy, but no longer a mystery. That was in September 1964. No nonfiction work ever received better reviews. It was a bestseller. But 2 years later, the climate of American opinion had undergone a dramatic and disquieting change. By the fall of 1966, one reputable pollster found that nearly two-thirds of all Americans doubted the Commission's conclusion that Oswald acted alone. The doubt was attributed partly to a sense of frustration that Oswald was never brought to justice, a mixed sense of guilt and unease about Dallas. But it was attributed in larger measure to a new phenomenon in American literature, a growing 5-foot shelf of anti-Warren books. Beginning with Buchanan's Who Killed Kennedy, printed in Britain even before the Warren Commission submitted its report, a dozen books had been published, each rejecting the Commission's findings and most posing different theories of the assassination. Suddenly, a whole army of amateur sleuths had taken upon itself, some out of honest misgivings, others for fun and profit, the task of demolishing the Commission and its conclusions. The new theories posed ranged in improbability from Buchanan's "A Texas oil millionaire decreed the deaths of Kennedy and Khrushchev to gain control of the world oil market," to Edward J. Epstein's mild-sounding conclusion in his book, Inquest, "There is a strong case that Oswald could not have acted alone." In between were such works as The Oswald Affair by Leo Sauvage, a Frenchman who believes Kennedy was killed by Southern racists, and Whitewash by Harold Weisberg, a Maryland poultry farmer who apparently disbelieves everything in the Warren report but the page numbers. Several authors held that Oswald was framed, a fall guy for reactionary interests, including variously FBI, CIA, and Army types. One insisted that the assassin, still unknown, fired from a manhole, since filled in, on the grassy knoll and escaped through a storm sewer. Others theorized that Kennedy was killed by a stranger impersonating Oswald. A Texas group maintained the assassin fired from a papier-mâché tree, built especially for the occasion and removed afterward. A Texas editor, Penn Jones Jr., weighed in with a volume called Forgive My Grief, attributing 18 mysterious deaths that followed Kennedy's murder to a nationwide plot to wipe out persons connected in any way with the assassination. The bestseller of them all was Mark Lane's Rush to Judgment, a book that embraces almost every theory contrary to the Warren Commission findings. Lane, who sought unsuccessfully to defend Oswald before the Warren Commission, insists, or sometimes only implies, that Kennedy was killed by 2 or more gunmen as part of a conspiracy involving both Ruby and Tippit, that Oswald was framed by means of planted evidence, that Navy doctors, Dallas policemen, and almost everyone connected with the case joined in the conspiracy, and that the Warren Commission deliberately suppressed and distorted evidence to fit a preconceived verdict that Oswald was the lone assassin. That is a startling list of allegations to come from a man who refused to tell the Commission his source of a story which, if ever confirmed, would have given the inquiry an entirely new dimension. The story was never confirmed. But far from hurting his book, Lane's shrill flamboyance, his willingness to startle TV audiences with new and dubious charges, boosted his sales. The fun and games aspect of the Kennedy tragedy reached a tasteless crescendo in November 1966 when Esquire hawked its Super Christmas issue on the newsstands with a cover sticker reading, "Who Killed Jack Kennedy? 35 Theories and 84 New Leads." In this atmosphere, on the 3rd anniversary of Kennedy's death, 2 of the major U.S. publications that warmly embraced the Warren Commission report in 1964, Life magazine and the New York Times, suddenly shifted ground. Life, availing itself an opportunity to print for the third time the assassination film made by amateur movie cameraman Abraham Zapruder, for which it paid $40,000, called for a reopening of the case. Although it cited no new evidence, Life now had reasonable and disturbing doubts. The Times shift was even more puzzling. Without stating what questions it wanted answered, it called for the Warren Commission, which went out of existence on September 27, 1964, to speak out with further clarification and answers to unanswered questions. The Times made this demand, it said, not because of any of the specific charges brought by the dozens of books, TV shows, and articles about President Kennedy's assassination, but because of the general confusion in the public mind raised by the publication of allegations and the many puzzling questions that have been raised. This was like saying, "We are not impressed by any of the specific challenges to the Commission report, but because the challengers have managed to confuse the public, we think the Commission should take on the responsibility to answer anyway." This tortuous reasoning not only blinks at the fact that the Warren Commission no longer exists, it suggests that each time a professional doubter raises a question such as, "How do we know only 3 shots were fired?" a member or former member of the Presidential Commission should spring to attention, call a press conference, refer his inquisitor to the Commission report, page 110, and defend it. Such a procedure would be guaranteed to prolong the present controversy with its damaging effects on the U.S. well into the 21st century. The damage already done to the U.S. image overseas is almost beyond repair, to the consternation of some legal scholars who cannot understand why, without new evidence, the poisonous debate should continue. That there has been a sudden wave of these anti-Warren publications proves nothing, Professor Arthur L. Goodhart of Queen's College, Oxford, observed recently, after viewing dimly the far-out theories espoused by the British press. It must be remembered that no matter how many zeros are added together, the result will still be 0. The Commission, of course, is open to criticism. With hindsight, it should have called some witnesses it didn't call and spent less time with some it did. It should have published the Bethesda autopsy findings, at least establishing the nature of Kennedy's wounds, without waiting 10 months to include them in its final report. And though it couldn't have analyzed them without assistance from the doctors who made them, it should have taken custody of the autopsy photographs and x-rays instead of turning them over to the Kennedy family. The fact remains, however, that while many theories have been advanced, no new evidence that could possibly alter any finding of the Warren Commission has been produced by anyone since the Commission closed its books in 1964. Most of the questions to which answers are or were obtainable were answered in the Commission's report and its 26 volumes of hearings. Where there were no final answers, the Commission prudently made no attempt to answer categorically. On the number of shots fired, for instance, it said only that the weight of evidence indicates that there were 3 shots fired. It did not say flatly that the bullet which pierced President Kennedy's neck also wounded Governor Connally. It said, after prolonged debate, the evidence that it did so was very persuasive. Because it is impossible to prove a negative, it did not say flatly that Oswald was not a part of any conspiracy. It said the entire investigative apparatus of the U.S. could find no evidence that he was. These conclusions are as reasoned as any 7 honest, disinterested men could reach on the basis of all evidence adduced by a highly competent staff of lawyers aided by the FBI, the Secret Service, the CIA, the Internal Revenue Service, and local police around the country. Still, the critics suggest that the Commission really didn't want and really didn't try to uncover any evidence of a conspiracy. Its real mission, it became fashionable to say, was to soothe and reassure the country. The assassination buffs, the professional critics, the opportunists with an angle produced the style and the fabric and helped create the fashion. No critic has yet suggested what would motivate the Chief Justice, 4 members of Congress representing both parties, and 2 elder statesmen of the establishment to soothe and reassure the country if, in fact, a conspiracy was afoot.